Why don't you stand over here so folks. So it makes me very happy to introduce Tanishka. And when she asked about being an MC for First Fridays, we thought that was a great idea. She is a sophomore majoring in finance and management information systems. We know all about managing information here. And she has been working in the YMCA archives for 2 months. So please give Tanishka a warm welcome. All yours.
Hello, everyone. My name is Tanishka Kudwat. On behalf of the First Fridays Committee and Archives and Special Collections Department, welcome to First Fridays. This season's theme is To Whom It May Concern. We will explore the correspondence, letters, notes, messages, and other forms of mail that comprise the backbone of the archives. Today's presentation will also be posted later on the University of Minnesota Library's YouTube channel. First Fridays is a monthly series of presentations made possible by a generous gift from Governor Elmer L. Anderson and Mrs. Eleanor Anderson in honor of former library director Dr. Edward B. Stanford. The presentations are based on materials in the university's libraries, archives, and special collections. A special thank you to the interpreters from Middle English who will be providing ASL interpretation for today's presentation. If time allows, there will be Q&A at the end. If Zoom audience members have any questions for our speaker today, please submit them using the Q&A function and not the chat so that we can keep track of your questions. In-person audience, please hold your questions until the end. There will be a tour after the presentations with Tim. Pause for land acknowledgement. The University of Minnesota, Twin Cities, is built within the traditional homelands of the Dakota people. It is important to acknowledge the peoples on whose land we live, learn, and work as we seek to improve and strengthen our relations with tribal nations. We also acknowledge that words are not enough. We must ensure that our institution provides support, resources, and programs that increase access to all aspects of higher education for American Indian students, staff, faculty, and community members. Our presentations today feature the Children's Literature Research Collections and Treasure Collection for GLBT Studies. Our first presentation is from Caitlin Marino, Assistant Curator, Children's Literature Research Collections. It's titled Off Topic, Letters from the Children's Literature Research Collections. From editorial notes and rejection letters to fan mail, romance, personal lives, and complaints, letters in CLRC collections span a wide range of topics, only some of which are related to children's books.
Hello, everybody. Correspondence is one of my favorite things. You learn about people's lives in a way that's different than nearly any other kind of document. Even the most boring letters often have little sparks of details about people's everyday lives and thoughts that's not captured any other way in the records. For my presentation today, I decided to focus on an assortment of various letters in a few different collections. None of them are really related to each other in any way, and none of them are about the children's literature writing process, if that's what you were expecting out of my presentation today, hence the title, Off Topic. We're going to start out with long-distance relationship letters. Louis Slobodkin was an author, illustrator, and sculptor in the children's literature world. He is best known for the Caldecott Medal-winning Many Moons, written by James Thurber, as well as his illustration for books such as The Moffats and The 100 Dresses, both by Eleanor Estes. He was born in 1903, and prior to illustrating his first children's book in the early 1940s, he was best known for his work as a sculptor, working in both France and the United States. He married his wife Florence, who would go on to be a writer herself in 1927. She published her first book, Too Many Mittens, with Louis in 1958. In the early 1930s, he left Florence and their young son, Lawrence Basil, who they called Basie, to work as a sculptor's assistant in Paris, where he worked in the studio of Malvina Hoffman. The photos here show Louis working alongside his fellow sculptors at Hoffman's Paris studio. We hold several folders of correspondence exchanged between Louis and Florence while he worked abroad in Paris, and they are enlightening exchanges on their lives and personalities. Florence's letters, on the whole, are often fairly straightforward reads, describing the events of the day, what their son has been up to, her bouts of sadness with Louis gone, interspersed with reassurances not to worry about her, and she will be fine. In a letter of March 9th, 1931, she had a sweet little exchange about Louis. Quote, "I was thinking today about how much nicer, handsome, and more clever you are than anybody else's husband or boyfriend. I said so to somebody and she said, well, if you don't think so, who should? Or something to that effect. I was going to argue that point by saying, I admit I've seen nicer babies than mine, so if there were nicer husbands, I'd admit it, even though you're mine. But I couldn't argue that way because I've never seen a nicer baby than mine either, so there you are. I can't prove the point to people who don't know you, but those who do, I'm inclined to think, agree with me, and those who know Basie can see my cause for raving on that score too." At the very end of the letter, she does add the very quick line, "Please tell me you're still celibate. I'm afraid I'm worried." That single line of concern from the letter kicks off a very detailed response from Louis in his letter from March 18th, who proceeds to assure her that not only is he not having affairs with other women in Paris, he goes on to detail all of the places he is most definitely not meeting up with them. Quote, "Let me settle this business of my virtue, celibacy. Know this, I've become so accustomed to my lily white purity that I don't even think about it. I'm not the least bit curious of it. I've already written of my method of discouraging amorous advances, and I make no attempts to take anyone to bed, into dark hallways, park benches, under the quay of the Seine, into the cemetery, up a dark alley, into the public urinals, behind quarter bounds, or any other places where a young man in the full glory of his youth performs the rituals of love." And this is written without tears. He later goes on to describe a woman named Stella Stein and makes numerous references to what seems to be herring. I'm not 100% sure about the inference, but I'm assuming it might be a reference to herring being an aphrodisiac. Quote, "What is Stella Stein like? What are all girls who are called Baby like? Phlegmatic, inclined towards plumpness, afeared to be taken for one of the chosen. Yet she enjoys herring with as much enthusiasm as Mish. Privately, she never tears a herring on the public highway, but when Lippy, my tutor of Parisian life, and I sometimes stop in the Oasis, a Russian cafe, on our way home, we find her there with a German sculptor, married, 12-year-old boy, and herringbone clinging to her chin and a look of shame in her eyes. Wolf, the German sculptor, is sort of uncomfortable nowadays his wife has come to Paris. He'd been palling with Baby quite a bit, in fact, every night. I don't envy him the mess he's mixed into. If you've become suspicious of any women I mentioned in my letters, my dear, I'm afraid you're going to cramp my literary style terribly. And if I have time, I'll write you a description of the women I've spoken to and know here. Not having slept with any here, can I say, I know them. I guess you can make your own judgment on whether this would reassure you of your husband's fidelity or not. If these letters pique your interest, the family recently paid for these folders of correspondence to be scanned and put online and are available to view on YouMedia. Though I should offer a word of warning, if you choose to dive into them, Louis' letters in particular contain some offensive and racist language. Moving on to the protest quit letter. Sometimes you find correspondence between people you aren't expecting. While processing the Sidney Taylor papers, who is the author of the All of a Kind family series of children's books, I ran across several letters addressed to her husband, Ralph Taylor. Ralph, who along with his brother owned the historic pharmacy and fragrance company Caswell Massey, worn by such prominent members of society as John F. Kennedy, and their New York storefront is pictured up there. Received this protest quit letter from an employee named Joan in 1965. The company had previously been the subject of labor action, including a nearly 2-year-long strike by retail workers in 1955. In this letter, Joan begins, "Mr. Ralph Taylor, I cannot in all good conscience continue to work for you, so I've decided to quit my job. I find it very difficult to work for an exploiter of poor people." She notes that she herself was treated very well, something she ascribes to her identity, saying, quote, "I am white and I am Jewish." However, she is appalled by the way the Black employees in the company are treated. Considering the fact that without them, you wouldn't be making the tremendous profit you do, I think they deserve is an hour for lunch, a 3-week vacation every year, a $20 increase in salary, 1 day sick leave per month, and some kind of air conditioning during the summer months so they can work comfortably. I guess all capitalists seem to forget that they could not exist without the sweat of their laborers. She goes on to note that he will be one of those who will attempt to suppress Black people's struggles for respect in this country rather than help. Unfortunately, we don't hold any other materials related to the company or any indication of what Ralph Taylor's response was to the letter. However, I find it very interesting that this was kept. Since the collection is primarily related to Sidney Taylor, we have only a limited number of items related to Ralph. This highly critical letter, though, was one she held on to. Travel letters. We recently acquired an interesting small cache of letters written by a woman named Sheila Lafarge, who, among other things, was a translator of Scandinavian literature. 2 of her Swedish children's book translations are pictured here. And she also worked some in film, including with the Swedish director Maj Zetterling. The correspondence here is especially interesting because it's several decades worth of her letters addressed to her friend and cousin, Edith Island Byron, beginning in their childhood in 1948, when Sheila was around 12, and spanning all the way until 1990. They spent much time together as children, especially during the summers, which they often spent at their grandmother's large estate in New Rochelle, New York. The early letters are fun and feel very much like exchanges between young friends, including discussions about movies, life, and family members. Sheila fairly often complains about a boy named Richard. In many of her letters, she complains about him following her around and also that he occasionally hurts Lady, who I assume was a pet. In this letter to Edith, she writes, quote, "Your boyfriend Richard is gone. The world breathes again." Katie calls him a vicious monkey. He has boils and has been sick. He should have his tonsils out, but he can't because the poor dear might catch polio. By the way, here is some bad news. Beatrice, who I believe was another family member, is better. After 2 years, the doctors say she can play golf. Ugh. Sheila also spent much time in the United Kingdom and Europe. This letter was written while she was still young from the United Kingdom. Dear Edith, my England has been grand fun. You'd love it because so much of the country scenes are perfectly miniature like the figures you have. Every little village is nestled in a cozy corner with its old church and tiny houses cluttered along the narrow streets. Most everything is done by horse and bicycle. London is wonderful, I think, but London is not England. Every town is slightly different. The country changes so quickly, only in a matter of miles. She also travels to France fairly young, going on to a group trip to Paris as a teen. Quote, "Whatever you do, Edith, don't go on a trip with a group of young girls. It is absolute death on every count. First degree." Paris was heavenly to get back to. On the 14th, we decided we would do something for our waiter, who was very attractive. Only 2 of us, so we used my blue PJ bottoms, her red stole, and a towel for one French flag, and painted things and made all sorts of decorations. When he came in with breakfast in the morning, we blew our moose horn and cried, "Vive la France!" and gave him 2 ties as a present. He was terribly touched, as the French can get, and all the help in the hotel came to see the decoration. We were treated especially well, and our chaperone was mad as can be, because she thought everyone should bow to her as the grande dame, but they were so wonderful with the 2 of us and came to shake hands as we left the hotel for London. She continues to travel frequently as she gets older, and her letters touch on her observations of numerous countries, including politics, racism, art, and culture. She even travels to Iceland, which she discusses in depth in this letter. Quote, "Weirdly enough, the rains and heavy mists of the last week hardly seem to diminish the brightness of the light. I have an unscientific idea that the clarity of the atmosphere, the lack of dust and smog, etc., means that light can shine and reflect in every particle of mist and rain more brightly than it would elsewhere. Also, except over the glaciers where they pile up in cumuli, the clouds seem to rush past in sea cloud rolls, low, shaggy, not deep layered." She goes on to discuss the landscape more and also talks about the economic situation. Quote, "Everything has become expensive and difficult for the people since I was here. 2 stiff devaluations, inflation, bad weather. Things are as much, if not more than in New York, especially what has to be imported. 100 sheets of typing paper of cheap quality costs $5. On the other hand, a beautiful sweater made here might only be $8. She also notes that they still have the best bookstores I think I have seen anywhere, and they really read. Bookstores with books in about 8 languages, plus translations of just about everything Indo-Icelandic. No mean feat. They are very well informed. Her observations of the contemporary state of Europe continues in other letters. In this 1968 letter, she is again writing from England. This letter was written on March 5th, just days after the British Parliament had passed an Immigration Act to try and further restrict migration to the UK from Commonwealth countries, primarily in this case out of fear that South Asian people who had settled in Kenya during the British colonial years were fleeing that country and would resettle in the UK. Quote, "It is terrible to read of the demoralization which quite obviously everyone feels in the States, but perhaps most tragically the academic. It's quite the same in most of the world, however, certainly in England. The last weeks here have made people grim, gloomy, dull, irritable, apathetic, and disillusioned. Not only the pound sterling slipping again, because I think everyone feels the devaluation wasn't enough, and when it goes again, so too will the dollar, but the whole panic treatment of Asians with British passports. With marvelous self-righteous indignation, this country has been able to feel that it will never have the racial problems of America, that it is fair-minded, etc. Well, there's a great deal of suppressed violence here, and the whole racial thing has been growing at an alarming rate. In the last week, there have been awful scribblings on the walls all around my neighborhood. It is very well to say that they are written by ignorant, embittered people, but when that is combined with the government's attitude, which is totally unjustifiable, the inevitable result is ugly." She has additional correspondence touching on time in other countries, including Denmark and Ireland, as well as an attempted visit to Leningrad in 1970, where her visa was denied hours before she was to leave. Quote, "Phyllis might have told you something of the Russian saga, which in fact dragged on over 10 weeks in all and involved both a weird conversation with a man who had been watching my house for weeks and said he was a Pole living in Canada, and a possible CIA agent who was equally obtrusive. She received back her visa request with Russian writing all over it, questioning her information. Quote, the Harvard man from the Russian Studies Department who translated all the scribbles and a friend of Phyllis's both seemed to hint at the same abduction or possible misunderstanding, that I was confused with recent people with French surnames connected with literary and or academic surroundings who have recently been responsible for smuggling of unpublished manuscripts from the USSR. A Marxist friend here said the same and agreed with the rather simplified logic Phyllis had said that Russians would use, i.e., that I am living in an apartment that Svetlana Stalin lived in first in America while her first book was being translated, that the 3 British films I have credit for can all be connected, if somewhat obscurely, with theories and practices of socialism. Stockholm was a socialist city in the West, Iceland, William Morris. I think that my independence grated on them and the lack of pattern in my life, my not being either significantly openly left or nor right. According to the donor, Alex, who is the son of Edith Island Byron, who Sheila wrote her letters to, and is pictured here with Sheila in the mid-70s, the two eventually lost touch when Sheila, in the early 1990s, sold her belongings and joined a Buddhist community. Complaint letters. If you are here because you're a longtime patron or friend of the CLRC, you may already know the story of our founding donor, Dr. Irvin Kerlin. He was an alumni of the University of Minnesota and worked for many years in the Food and Drug Administration in Washington, D.C., before eventually taking up the hobby of collecting children's books, in particular first editions and award winners. As part of his collecting, he struck up close friendships with many of the authors and illustrators whose books he collected, soliciting them for signatures on his copies, as well as original pieces of art and manuscripts, which he began donating to the University Library beginning in 1949. The following is a 1959 letter from James Flora, a children's author and illustrator and commercial artist, best known for his record covers. As was typical of Kerlin, he maintained an ongoing correspondence with Flora. This letter shows Flora's response in regards to a promise of original art he had apparently given to Kerlin. Quote, "Dear Irvin, I've made you a promise that I am not going to be able to keep at present. I opened the big package of artwork from Harcourt, finally. I am sorry they contain only the acetate separations of the fabulous Firework family and The Day the Cow Sneezed. The original drawings are not included. I spoke to Harcourt and they said they are holding them for a while and are constantly exhibiting them here and there. Being a tiger for royalties, I didn't feel I should insist they be returned. When they are, I promise you shall have them. Later in the letter is my favorite tidbit. Quote, you may be sure that I will call you whenever I am in Washington. Doctors and trombone players are my favorite kinds of people. If you should happen to play trombone as well as collect children's books, then I would need look no farther for the ideal man. However, I will not be spending the remainder of this presentation on this sort of correspondence with Kirtland. If you're interested in these letters, we have several boxes of correspondence from authors and illustrators. And one of our previous Kirtland board presidents, Professor Gene Stevenson, even compiled this wonderful book several years ago of some of them called Dear Dr. Kirtland. In those correspondences, you can delve into the close relationship he developed in the children's literature world. Instead, I will be highlighting some of the correspondence that has received less discussion in public, namely Kirtland's complaint letters to the University of Minnesota. Kirtland maintained deep friendships with many people and was passionate about his chosen hobby of children's literature. However, his feelings and relationships with the university were often more fraught. Despite the fact that Dr. Kirtland received quite a bit of press and acclaim regarding his collection, including newspaper articles, features in the alumni magazine, and special awards, Kirtland always felt that his collection was unappreciated and neglected by the university library and the university as a whole, and did not fear letting them know his opinions on the matter. This letter to his friend Harold Kittleson, a Minneapolis-based rare book collector and specialist from 1950, highlights his feelings even at this early date. Please note that these scans are from photocopies that were made by previous staff members. No original letters were harmed by ballpoint pen. Tuesday night, I went to a U of M alumni dinner and had a little chat with President Morrill. I have had a little run-in with McDermott, and Willie has tried to placate me. I am feeling okay again with wide reservations. The excellent things coming to the collection of late convinces me that with a little enthusiasm from the university, we could build the greatest collection in the world, which it probably already is without their cooperation. He was often quick to follow up with the head of the library, Dr. Edward B. Stanford, anytime an announcement or article about the collection came out which had an inaccuracy or was not enthusiastic enough. In a letter from 1956, Kirtland wrote to Stanford with dismay about the fact that a talk being given at the Friends of the Library meeting on book plates did not mention the Kirtland book plate in the announcement about the upcoming talk. He also wrote anytime he received an honor he felt needed to be properly acknowledged by his alma mater. The following letter is from 1958. Dear Dr. Stanford, I am today agreeing to serve another year as honorary consultant on acquisition of children's books for the Library of Congress. A copy of my reply to this invitation is enclosed. I have also agreed to serve as consultant on children's literature for the Smithsonian Institution Traveling Exhibition Service. You will no doubt agree with me that these appointments are of enough significance to warrant mention in the Minnesota Alumni Magazine and other university publications. Both of these appointments are unique since neither consultantship existed until now at these institutions. You may also wish to acquaint President Morrill and Vice President Willie of these designated activities. Several months later, after these positions were mentioned in the Alumni Magazine under his initial graduation year of 1934, Kirtland wrote to Stanford as well as directly to President Morrill, quote, it was not fully revealing in as much as no mention is made of my degree in public health, also from U of M in 1938, nor is the kindness extended to say voluntarily donor of the Kirtland collection. If we do not avail ourselves of opportunities to talk about the collection among U of M publicity, I feel we are not helping each other in the broad sense. I regret at having to bring such small matters to your attention, but it would seem almost sine qua non, meaning essential. Several months later, he writes again to Dr. Stanford regarding flaws in an article that appeared in the Minneapolis Sunday Tribune, noting that he did not leave his apartment because of space, that it focused too much on his bachelorhood, and he was not satisfied with all the names that were not included of authors and illustrators. After 2 pages, he does note offhandedly at the end, I am mindful you had a real job to interest them to do the story, and so I thank you. Oh, I'm on the wrong slide. This was the letter. Kirtland was especially devastated by the decision in 1957 of the University of Minnesota Press not to print a new edition of his book, Newbery and Caldecott Awards, a bibliography of first editions, which they had first published in 1949. After the event, he wrote numerous letters about this slight to anyone he could, and it comes up frequently in later correspondence. In 1960, he wrote again to Harold Kittleston, noting, quote, "The university is crazy as ever, and Stanford has as much sympathy for the collection as a hard-bitten landlord. No warmth or real feeling, I've decided." Stanford, for his part, was clearly greatly frustrated by these interactions. This letter, written by Stanford to Vice President Willey in regards to an alleged incident in which Kurland said a relative of his was unable to access the collection, Stanford writes, quote, "I am sorry Dr. Kurland felt it necessary to bother President Morrill with his latest grievance against the library, but you know he seems to seize avidly upon anything that will substantiate his belief that he has received only shabby treatment from his alma mater in return for his bountiful generosity. I get this sort of criticism frequently from other librarians to whom he pours out his discontent at our lack of appreciation." Later, he comments, "As you well know, nothing the university has done for Dr. Kurland seems to be sufficient to make him happy. We have done well by his collection in relation to its value and the funds we could devote to it, but he still feels we should devote much more attention to it and publicizing it." Despite all this, when Kurland retired in the 1960s from the FDA due to his health, he reached out several times to Dr. Stanford and to university administration about the possibility of a job in the library where he could devote himself to the collection. You will not be surprised that they were less than enthusiastic about this possibility. President Wilson, who took over the job from President Morrill in 1960, even wrote him directly, noting that they did not have a position for him. Despite this, he apparently kept up the pressure, and Dr. Stanford wrote to Willard Thompson in the president's office several months later, concerned that Wilson, who had not had as much experience with Dr. Kurland, would, quote, "inadvertently make some agreement with him to find a place for him in the library operation." You would think in the midst of his dissatisfaction, he might rethink sending materials to the collection, but it did not appear to slow his collecting and shipments to the university. And despite pleas for reimbursement, he maintained regular shipments that he was paying for shipping out of pocket. His friend Marion McGreevy, an instructor and school nurse at the University High School, wrote a scolding letter to Irvin in 1963, arguing that he was never going to get what he wanted unless he started playing hardball. Quote, dear Irv, please let Mama scold for a minute. For heaven's sake, quit sending all your goodies on to the U of M until the Bastriches commit themselves to some sort of financial agreement, for postage if nothing else, even yet. Were I in the position of Wilson, Stanford, etc., I doubt I'd make a serious effort to obtain any kind of a remuneration for you, as long as you just wrote letters which can be ignored and yet continued sending the addition to the collection. Who says it's impossible to eat your cake and have it too? So stop, cease, desist, etc. Quit sending stuff until we can get sufficiently organized to make our pitch. The only thing I suggest, perhaps, is that you write another letter to that effect until satisfactory financial arrangements are made. You will no longer send more of the collection. And stop sending. I mean, she has a point. Unfortunately, Kurland died a few months later in December 1963, so I do not know if he would eventually listen to her and receive what he needed for the collection. Eventually, a dedicated curator was hired, though, and his name lives on through his generous donation and the work that was done in its wake. So I hope he would have some satisfaction that his work and collection are indeed appreciated, although I am sure he would have a thing or two to say about many of our curatorial decisions. That's my talk for today. Thank you.
Our second presentation is Community by Mail, Finding Liberation Through Reader-Written Magazines, presented by Aidan Bettine, curator, Treader Collection, and GLBD Studies. Before mass print production and the age of the internet, LGBTQ people built community and found each other through reader-written magazines. Throughout the 1950s, 60s, and 70s, sending mail to underground publications became a critical way to engage in community. Gain a glimpse into the publications held in the Treader Collection that were made by mail.
Thank you. My talk today aligns with the current exhibit in the main gallery. For those of you in person behind us, and for those of you on Zoom, I hope you can join us to view the exhibit before it comes down on May 17th. And I'd like to invite you all to an exhibit reception next Tuesday evening from 6 to 8 here in the Anderson Library. At the heart of the Tretter collection is certainly an array of publications published through the second half of the 20th century to today. As a body, these periodicals and publications show how the LGBTQ community has been built over time in disparate places throughout the country, identifying how publications have served as a critical tool for community formation before and well into the gay liberation movement of the 1970s. Today, I'm bringing into view 4 of these publications that are reader-written, meaning that readers and subscribers to the publications were the active content creators, mailing in articles, reviews, letters to the editors, photographs, artwork, poetry, and in some publications, personal ads, but we'll get to that. One of my goals today is to complicate the United States Postal Service in the context of LGBTQ history as both an entity with the power to enact homophobia through law and a tool for the LGBTQ community to find each other, find themselves, and fight for liberation and visibility. To start us off, I'm focusing on one of the 2 earliest lesbian and gay publications in the US that were first printed during the homophile movement of the 1950s. One magazine first appeared in 1953 as a publication of One Inc., one of the first gay rights organizations in the United States, founded in Los Angeles in 1952. As a Midwesterner, I have to say, though, the earliest gay rights organization was founded in 1924 in Chicago. Many of the board members and authors of One used pen names to protect their identities. However, within a few months of releasing their first issue, the FBI identified everyone and wrote their employers, calling all staff deviants and security risks. Each issue of One had 4 main sections: articles, fiction, poetry, and departments. Departments was one of the most eccentric sections and contained letters from the editors, book reviews, reader letters, and a tangent section that contained DIY news reports from readers around the country. A frequent refrain throughout the pages of One is an invitation that reads, quote, "Your manuscripts, contributions, and work are welcomed. One is entirely yours," end quote. The latter, One's essentially lesbian companion, was the first nationally distributed lesbian publication in the United States. Published from 1956 to 1972, the latter was the primary monthly publication and method of communications for the Daughters of Bilitis, the first lesbian organization in the United States. They began as a private social club, an alternative to the frequently raided bar scene, and quickly grew into a national lesbian rights organization with local chapters throughout the country. The Daughters of Bilitis were subject to not just the surveillance of local police, but much like One, also the CIA and FBI throughout the organization's existence. Each issue of the latter was produced on a typewriter, duplicated on a mimeograph, and hand-stapled by a team of volunteers. Each issue regularly featured book reviews, news, poetry, short stories, a running bibliography of lesbian literature, aka Lesbiana, letters from readers, and updates from the Daughters of Bilitis meetings, along with their organizational statement of purpose, always grounding this magazine in the political rights of lesbians. Both One and the latter made a critical impact on their readers in just a few issues and reached national circulation through word of mouth and friends exchanging issues. Mr. A from San Jose, California, wrote to One saying, "One is doing a magnificent job, and I wish to extend my heartfelt thanks. Yours was the first homosexual magazine I ever read, and through it I found the Mattachine Review, and through them, the Daughters of Bilitis. Prior to that time, I had never read anything of an explanatory or affirmative nature on the problem except what I had found in Kinsey. Repressed, fearful, and uncertain, I suffered both mentally and physically, yet knew of no solution to my shameful problem, as I vaguely termed it. Then I found One and discovered that there were many others like myself, and that was even more important to me. They are intelligent, sincere, worthwhile human beings, not silly, vaguely masculine or feminine shadows, and they were working on their problems, confused and troubled by it, even as I was. What a revelation. While readers of the latter, LL from California and Anonymous from Brunswick, wrote into the magazine, "Thank you 1,000 times over for your publication. How elated I am to know that such a magazine exists. I can't begin to tell you how lonely it is walking alone." Very badly put, but nevertheless, I have an intense longing to communicate with other persons like myself who live on the outside. I'm 27 years old and have never met anyone with whom I could exchange profound feelings. I'm deeply sensitive to insensitive people, and for this reason, I choose to live entirely alone. End quote. Anonymous writes, "Congratulations. However silent or distant we may be, there are many friends of yours back here in the East. Although I wish my spine, backbone, and courage could be as great as yours, it isn't. I'm proud of you for having started the ball rolling. Could I help in some small way to push it anonymously for now?" And this is often how the publications were exchanged, anonymously among friends, traveling by hand. So even though we do have distribution numbers for both of these publications over the year, we know their circulation was that much greater as people passed along each magazine. In the abundance of letters written by readers of both magazines, they found connecting by mail through the printed word made them feel overall less lonely, less afraid, and often brought a sigh of relief through knowing there were others living both boldly and quietly throughout the country. However, these publications required discretion, sent in plain brown envelopes their entire existence to avoid outing their readership. They even required, as seen here on the screen, subscribers to sign that they were indeed over 21 to protect the publication's circulation. All of the editors were deeply aware of the risks associated with circulating these publications in the mail and went through great lengths to protect the rights to circulate these periodicals, both for themselves and for their readers. Both magazines were impacted by the Comstock laws of 1873, which were a broad set of anti-obscenity and immorality laws passed by the US Congress that criminalized the distribution of information about contraception, abortion, sex, and sex toys through the United States Postal Service. In the 1950s, during the McCarthy era and the Lavender Scare, the Postal Service leveraged this legislation to persecute homosexuals. It is critical to note here that publishing and selling these publications was not illegal. It was only through the act of sending magazines by mail that the publishers and readers of one faced legal actions in regard to obscenity. Despite its lack of homoerotic visuals or sexual content, in 1953, one faced scrutiny from USPS, postal inspectors, for being obscene simply for discussing the topic of homosexuality. The issue you see here on the screen was published in October of 1953, after the August issue had been delayed by USPS postal inspectors. And on this issue, they, for one time, used their name as part of the title and say, "One is not grateful," and explain the light story of how their magazine got held up. They let readers know that the August issue was late because, quote, "Postal authorities in Washington and Los Angeles had it under a microscope. They studied it carefully from the 2nd until the 18th of September, and finally decided that there was nothing obscene or lewd in it. They allowed it to continue on its way. We have been found suitable for mailing," end quote. However, in 1954, the Postal Service refused to deliver one to its readership, and the magazine fought back, appealing the case, or the charges that were brought by the postal inspectors. They published an issue about mailable materials to provide vital information while they were on this legislative battle and to help protect their readership. What could you write in? How could you write in? And how could we kind of make code language and be subtle? They took this case through the courts, and although they originally lost their initial case in 1954, they appealed it through a lower court, and eventually the case reached the Supreme Court in 1958, one of the first cases heard relating to homosexuality. with the justices decided in favor of one legally detangling homosexuality from obscenity in the male, or at least in the context of the male at this juncture. Although the gay liberation movement was just over a decade away into the future from this moment, one's legal victory in 1958 shifted what got printed in the articles and especially on the covers of the magazine, allowing more intentional homosexual content. This legal victory also benefited other publications in becoming more overtly LGBTQ, including its counterpart, The Ladder. I love that they switched to photographs too at a certain point. Yet, this wasn't enough for readers. They wanted more of a connection. They wanted to reach each other, and they continuously, relentlessly asked both periodicals for a pen pal exchange. Quote, one writer writes in, quote, "My main purpose in writing this letter is to inquire if such a writing group exists, and if so, may I join it? I don't expect you to forward any addresses, but I would sincerely appreciate it if you advanced my letter to someone that would be interested in such a correspondence," end quote. This was sent into The Ladder. As well as the second one, quote, "I'm a Hungarian immigrant. I'm 26 years old and should like to correspond with a 40 or 50-year-old woman. Please help me and send me an address." Yet The Ladder was unable and perhaps unwilling to facilitate a mail exchange or expose their readers to state-sanctioned homophobia and outing through the mail. They write back to the Hungarian immigrant in particular and say, quote, "We receive a great many letters of this nature from various parts of the world. However, we are not set up to help those who wish to find someone with whom to correspond. Because of the laws in this country and the stigma attached to homosexuality, most of our member readers prefer to remain anonymous. They rely on us to use discretion and to keep such information in confidence. Therefore, much as we may be sympathetic to the problem, it is definitely against the policy of Daughters of Bilitis to give out names and addresses in any case. Sorry, the editors." One readers also asked for a pen pal system in 1959. Lynn Peterson, who was actually one of the editors of One, asks in this cover story, what is wrong with introducing homosexuals to one another or doing it via pen pal arrangements? In response, One did not create a pen pal system, certainly at their attorney's advice, but they created yet another section for readers to write into the magazine and communicate with one another, called Readers on Writers. Slightly different from the letters and the letters to the editor. Readers on Writers was specifically in response to that pen pal issue on the previous slide, and certainly encouraged readers to send more mail to the publication to be printed verbatim at length. One and The Ladder, as two of the earliest homophile and lesbian publications in the country, set a tone for LGBTQ publishing to come from the 1960s forward. The legal battle that the editors of One fought in particular opened the doors for new publications to emerge and circulate via USPS, including more overtly LGBTQ publications around niche interests, different identities, and intersections of the broad community. So moving forward in time, the next publication I'd like to look at is Transvestia. Transvestia is the earliest known magazine for transvestites and crossdressers. Its first issue appearing in January of 1960. It afforded its readers the ability to connect with one another and to write openly about their experiences. It quickly gained international readership and was published until 1986. Virginia Prince founded the magazine, which was published 6 times a year out of Los Angeles, and Transvestia was the first widely distributed magazine focusing initially on the cross-dressing community and over time expanding to include more content about the larger trans community. In an era before the internet, the publication became a major lifeline for readers. In 1961, Prince started the first cross-dressing organization, the Hose and Heel Club, which in 1962 became the alpha chapter of the Foundation for Full Personal Expression, or FPE. So you will see the FPE acronym throughout some of the next slides, and know that that stands for membership as part of that organization or a fellow member. In Transvestia, trans people could openly write about their experiences, challenges, and successes. Subscribers to the publication were able to network and connect with each other by way of articles, ads, and by personally writing to the editor. Regular features of the publication included letters to the editor, editorial emanations by prints, and the person-to-person section enabling readers to connect directly with each other. There we go, 1960s, we finally have some pen pals. Transvestia was completely reader-written and composed of fiction, articles, case histories, poems, photographs, and to participate in person-to-person, Prince implemented strict requirements to protect people's identities. To place an ad, readers had to have subscribed to the magazine and received 5 issues prior to submitting an ad. This was waived for anyone who was already a member of a full personality expression chapter in the country. And part of the scrutiny was because postal inspectors would often subscribe or pick up a single issue to be able to open mail and identify it as obscene. To facilitate person-to-person, finally we get the pen pals, right? Transvestia kept reader addresses on file and created a coded system for each reader placing an ad. They would receive mail to their P.O. box and forward it on to the person who placed the ad, leaving it in their personal hands to decide if they wanted to correspond and exchange information. And often you see calls for readers to meet other members of FPE, to meet other FPs or female impersonators, and to build connection and friendship along their shared experiences, whether they had an accepting wife, whether they lived alone, whether they were looking for a romantic connection. It's a pretty drastic shift from the earlier periodicals just a decade before that were still actively publishing while Transvestia came into print. The next publication I would like to focus on is moving us ahead to publishing during the gay liberation movement. I want to look to RFD magazine. RFD was born an anti-urban publication resisting narratives of rural to urban queer migration throughout the 1960s and 70s. It was first published out of Grinnell, Iowa in 1974 and compiled from contributions by rural gay men throughout the country, moving from commune to commune throughout the course of its publishing history. Still in print today, RFD derives its name from the acronym for Rural Free Delivery, a service of the United States Postal Service that guarantees all farmers receive mail since 1902. Fun fact about RFD issues, each one they also name independently a different version of the acronym, such as Reckless Fruit Delight, or Rabbits, Faggots, and Dragonflies, for example. So it's always fun to go into the issues in the archives and find out what is that specific title. Don't let it be confused with the Radical Fairy Digest. A lot of people assume that's what this magazine is or what it has become over time, but we all know it harkens back to Rural Free Delivery. In the 1970s and 1980s, the magazine offered an avenue for readers to participate actively in a rural gay community across the nation. It provided an emotional outlet and an avenue for empowerment in the face of discrimination from urban living gays. RFD regularly featured art, photographs, poems, articles, fiction, and more by its readers, but the crucial, consistent sections were titled Letters, 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 and Letters, and more letters. Appearing throughout the pages of each issue, there was never a single letter section in one of the publications. By its second issue in winter of 1974, second issue, RFD was already able to share a map of its readers from throughout the country and have readers writing in about their loneliness and isolation that they feel in rural communities. So underneath the map where each dot is a known reader of RFD. So think about also the magazine changing hands and how that grows. They write, at this moment, quote, RFD is being read in Vida, Nampa, Monona, Louisa, Philo, Solon, Malmo, Garnavio, in River Rouge, Rogue River, Fall Creek, Clear Creek, and Cross Creek, Camp Verde, Junction City, Liberty and Independence, Honeydew and Orange, Alpine, Bunston, Casper, Deering, and right where you're sitting, end quote. Many of these names, if not a city name, were names of gay communes around the country. We have another reader writing in, much like the letters from one or the latter, writing, quote, I'm a transplanted gay from rural Wisconsin to Madison. My gay life in the country was essentially one of loneliness. On graduating from high school, I moved to Madison specifically to attend the university, but also to seek out gay friends and companionship. I always found it much lonelier in rural areas because of the fact that there were no, or at least few ways of knowing who around you was gay. Having read about your magazine, I now really have developed a feeling of being trapped in the city. My longing for the country increases now that I know that through a magazine such as yours, it would be so much easier to get to know other gay guys in a rural setting. I'm 21 years old, and yet I still haven't known any rural gays. In this way, I feel my life very lacking because I know that I would have much in common and much to share with a gay person from similar backgrounds. And I feel that RFD may just at last make this possible for me. Tom Rye, Madison, Wisconsin. And this is a tension that is certainly seen throughout RFD's history of the urban to rural divide, and the assumption that many of us have made or have been taught, if we've learned about gay liberation and gay migration, the story is always about people moving out from the country into the city and especially out to the coasts. RFD is fantastic evidence of the people who remained close to home, who moved into intentional communities to live together and create a back to the land movement out of gay liberation. RFD regularly featuring art and photographs and poems. Oh, I skipped that one. Okay, so my notes got switched. Cool. RFD, you already see this tangible shift from the 1950s and 60s publications where anonymity, privacy, and no pen paling was allowed. And here on the screen, you see 3 different reader letters that include their mailing address printed in the publication. So a really tangible shift over the last 20 years of LGBTQ print culture. There could still be an anonymity. I wanted to include this letter from Minneapolis on the bottom left of the screen, where the anonymous sender writes, I would like to correspond with and meet other RFD readers from the Midwest. If you are visiting Minneapolis or live in this area, drop me a line so we can get together. I'm a former farmer displaced to the city. Please write, occupant, 2435 Pillsbury Avenue South, number 309, Minneapolis. We get another letter from Eugene, Oregon, of someone wanting to connect and, quote, contact gay people into natural healing, trying to find the niche interest. I've been exploring herbs, nutrition, massage, yoga, fasting, iris diagnosis, and other primal therapy, and usually do not meet other gay people at the healing festivals and classes that have been happening up and down the West Coast. What about a gay healers festival at the New World Fair next summer? This is from Tony Appleseed in Eugene, Oregon. And here, again, we see a niche interest at the intersection of rural gay life and the desire to find a connection and invite letters in response. So through this presentation, we've jumped across 2 decades from the first issues of one and the latter, and their outright refusal to facilitate pen pals, to seeing readers of RFD and Transvestia write to each other and be able to either circulate mailing addresses or print them and share them. RFD issues also include phone numbers at times. Although, as we saw, some choose to remain anonymous. The shift in LGBTQ history from secrecy and discretion to open resistance and community celebration is perhaps most visible when we look at the printed covers of these magazines across time. Throughout the 1960s and 1970s and 1980s, without the risk of obscenity trials, purely due to the discussion of homosexuality, lesbianism, or transsexuality, LGBT magazines flourished throughout the country. Reader-written magazines enabled LGBTQ people to find themselves and find each other in print at the intersection of their identities, geography, and social interests. A critical shift in visibility is precisely thanks to the activism against the Postal Service's systemic homophobia in the 1950s during the Lavender Scare, to the sustained work of community members to connect and find one another through the mail by not only subscribing to magazines, but writing into them and creating the very content they needed in the world. In this light, the post office is both violent historically and liberatory as a tool. I want to thank you all for attending First Fridays today and hearing both of our talks. Feel free to contact me if you'd like to see any of these periodicals. We have full runs of all 4 of the publications discussed today, and very happy to pull those out for you in the reading room. And again, I wanted to share the time and date of the reception next Tuesday to celebrate the exhibit, but I'll be around for questions in the exhibit after this as well. Thank you so much.
Okay, we have time for 1 or maybe 2 questions. Do we have anything from online, Kate? Okay, no questions online. I saw, yes, right here. Oh, wait, we have a microphone.
I got a
here,
mic so
come
the
around.
folks in the audience will hear.
Do the gay publications still come in brown envelopes?
That's a really fantastic question. I'd say some do, yes. Over time, as obscenity trials still happen around particularly gay pornography, which you can see in the exhibit, I have no doubt that those still come in brown envelopes. But one of the publications that I didn't discuss, that's a reader-written magazine, Lesbian Connection, it's one of the longest running lesbian publications, is still sent in discreet packaging to this day. And that's something that they promise their readers.
We had a couple right here. Just hand it down.
My impression of these communities is that they're largely white. Can you say anything about the participation, to the extent that you can, in these sources about people of color participating in these communities?
Absolutely. Thank you. That's
Thank
a
you.
fantastic question. Although, of course, a lot of the editors and writers were predominantly white, they were predominantly cis, gay, male, or lesbian women for their respective publications. I think I've seen across all of these publications tangible attempts at inclusion. The latter in particular, in Daughters of Bilitis, had a very working class oriented worldview in politics that certainly included women of color. And they tried very intentionally to have women of color as contributors and editors in the magazine as time progressed. So there were tangible efforts. But then in terms of the development of niche interests or intersections of the community throughout publications in time, there are many publications that then serve intentionally Black or communities of color or Indigenous communities alongside LGBTQ identities. And we have those represented both in the exhibition and in the collection. So
I think time maybe for 1 more question.
So the Treader collection, I'm curious about how collections and archiving works. So you received a lot of magazines from the Treader collection. Do you then subscribe to the magazines to grow the collection? And how do you decide what to subscribe to, and where does that money come from?
oh, that's a great set of questions. And always the conundrum, how do we keep collecting? So I do fortunately have a budget from the state and the library each year to acquire more publications and periodicals into the collection. So we don't have any active subscriptions where we're paying for each issue to come automatically, but I will often buy the most recent issues of publications still in print. And then there are a number of publications I can think of where they are aware of their own importance in terms of archiving and send a free copy to contribute to the archive. So there are some monthly periodicals, quarterly periodicals that just arrive in my mailbox, and I add to the collection. So thank you.
Thanks again to our presenters. Thanks for the great questions. If you are interested in a tour, just connect with Tim, who's in the back of the room. And we currently have 3 exhibits in the building. We have the one referenced by Aiden, Dear Community, Mail Correspondence and Postal Activism. That's in the main gallery across the hall. There's the Global Reach of Local Activism, Minnesota's Human Rights Stories, and that is on the 2nd floor balcony, and there's an elevator at the back of the atrium. And then down on the ground floor, inside the Wallen Center, is Gray Wolf at 50, First Drafts and Next Pages. Thanks for attending, and please join us again on May 3rd for presentations from the Upper Midwest Jewish Archives and the Sherlock Holmes Collection. Thanks, everyone.